It's a little scary when you go into major surgery and they tell you you're going to come out of this different.
Yeah.
And so, the morning that you get up to go into the hospital, I remember just, getting in the shower and getting cleaned up and looking at both of my hands and thinking, I'm going to come home without one of these.
Welcome to the Blind Mom Life podcast. I'm your host, Chelsey Painter Davis, blind wife, mother, and public speaker. I want to invite you to dive deep with my special guests and I as we talk conquering disabilities, cherishing motherhood, and choosing life. Are you ready? Action. Another week, another movie. And for today's episode, the film is Top Gun. Believe it or not, I had never actually seen this film until recently. I know, it's such a classic, and it's even one of my mom's favorites, but I had just never given the time to actually sit down and watch it. So for those of you that don't know, as I didn't know, Top Gun follows a naval officer named Maverick as he follows in his father's footsteps to become one of the greatest fighter jet pilots in the world. He and his fellow officers joined the school Top Gun to train and study to become the best of the best at naval military defense. It is so cool and so thrilling to watch Top Gun. It is definitely an action flick. I had to stop in like the first 10 minutes of the film and turn to my husband and say, wow. Like, I can't even see the planes flying by in this film, but just from the sound of it all, it is really exciting. And I just took a moment and thought about the fact that my dad, before his retirement, his job was to assist in the development of aircraft like that. That's just insane. That's so cool. My goofy old dad used to work to make stuff like that. That's just insane. That's so cool. It's so cool to see what your family's legacy was. And for my new friend, Mark, that was part of his family's legacy. He had family members who participated in defense like that. And it's just so incredible. So it is really easy to see how a kid would grow up watching Top Gun and say, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. I want to be a part of that legacy, just like Maverick did in the movie with his father being a fighter jet pilot. It's just so thrilling and so cool. But the thing about legacy is that we have expectations for what our earthly legacy should or shouldn't be. But God has greater plans for what it's going to be. So even when we're pulled from the family legacy of origin that we've desired, God adopts us into a new legacy that's even greater. And I can't think of a better way to share that example than my new friend, Mark.
All right, Mark, I'm so excited for you to come and share your story with us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first off, let me just say I'm honored to be able to do this. So it's exciting what you're using your podcast for to impact people's lives. And so thanks for letting me share my story.
Yeah.
So my name is Marc Roath, and we've lived in Lakeland about 3 years now. I'm on staff at Lakes Church, and so just glad to be here today.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your childhood, because you didn't always have a missing arm. So what was it like for you growing up as a kid? What were the expectations you had for your life? Like, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Sure. Well, my grandfather, one of my grandfathers was a World War II pilot. And so grew up just kind of loving airplanes. And when I was 15 years old, he said, it's time to get some sunshine between your rear end and the ground. And started learning how to fly airplanes and could actually fly an airplane really before I could legally drive a car.
Oh my goodness.
So
is that legal, by the way?
Well, I got a license. So yeah, I was able to get
about to say, is that a perk of it being your grandfather?
Yes. So that's what I thought I was going to do. My goal was to become a military pilot and then maybe one day fly for the airlines or something. And so my brother actually became a pilot and currently is a corporate pilot, flew in the military for about 23 years. And so There's usually not a day that doesn't go by that I don't look up and look at an airplane flying over. Just a real love for aviation, and that was a fun part of my teenage years, I would say.
So this is not only just something you were interested in. This is flight is a big part of your family then too.
Yes. Mm-hmm. 2 pilots in the family, that a brother and a grandfather.
So when did you, so you're going through your life, you're planning on being a pilot, you already know how to fly a plane. When did you first realize there might be something going on with your arm or some kind of health issue?
Sure. So I'd gone off to college. I had looked at some different, actually aviation schools. There's one over in Daytona called Embry-Riddle. I looked at the military in one of those academies and tested a colorblind test. And I'm not actually colorblind, but had a bad test. And so it kind of ruled out some military stuff initially. So I really just went off to Florida State, not because I was a football fan or anything, but because that's what my parents could afford for me to go. And it was far enough away from home that I felt like it was kind of getting out of town. And continued working on my pilot's license with that goal of eventually getting there. But during my freshman year, developed a strange pain in my left hand, kind of like I had a marble underneath my palm. And when I would push on it, it felt like taking a knife and driving it through my hand.
Wow.
And so knew something was wrong, and told my parents about it. And they're like, we need to get that checked out. That's not good. And so that led to several medical tests and ultimately a diagnosis.
What was that? Tell us about that diagnosis.
Yeah, so I came home, and I was actually taking summer classes. So I didn't have a whole lot of time. I was trying to get a job off at school, and I told the guy that I was trying to get a job with, who was my Sunday school teacher at church, like, hey, I'll be back in 2 weeks, hold the job for me until I get back. And so after going home and doing x-rays and CAT scans and biopsies and MRIs and all that kind of good stuff, the doctors came back and said, ding, 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 you're the winner. You have a malignant tumor in your left hand. You have cancer. And he said, if we don't do anything about it, it will kill you. I was one of 3 people in the state of Florida at that time to have this particular diagnosis. It's called synovial carcinoma. It's kind of what makes your muscles fluid. It tends to spread rapidly, and if it gets to your lymph nodes, you don't make it. Another guy had gotten it and got to his lungs, and ultimately he lost his life. And so that was a big deal when a doctor tells you when you're 19 years old that you can die. So at the same time that's happening, I had started going to church when I was off at school because my mom just begged me just to go one Sunday. Mm-hmm. And I guess I ran out of excuses and finally went. And so had built some friendships with some guys that were at church, and they just began praying for me and really began investing in my life. And so once I got this cancer diagnosis, I'd paid enough attention in church to realize that God's got a plan here. And so, I need to maybe seek out what God's trying to do in my life.
What was that like emotionally, moving from, oh my goodness, I just got this horrible diagnosis, I'm only 19, to really like trying to trust God with that? And what was that journey like for your parents too? Because I can't imagine being told that my little baby, even if she was already 19, has cancer. That sounds devastating.
Yep. In your parents' eyes, you're always 5 years old, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so they were very concerned, and kind of calling the leaders of the church wanting to pray for me and anoint me with oil and pray that God would heal. And but God had given me a sense of peace. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you." And so that in Philippians 4:13, where it says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," just really had resonated with me. And I had this really strange sense of peace that life was going to be okay, even if it meant, my whole career path was going to change. The doctor gave me a couple of options. It was, we can try to cut it out, which will leave you with a limp hand. We'll do extensive radiation and chemotherapy over a several-year process. And they said, it might give you about a 50% chance of survival.
Oh, wow.
Or, we can do these other options. He said, but our best option to save your life literally would be to amputate your hand and give you extensive chemotherapy for about 6 months and see what that happens. There's no guarantees, but that might do it. And so obviously when a doctor's telling you this, you're kind of thinking, I kind of like living. So prayed a lot and just got to a point where I said, okay, I'll go through with that amputation, which I knew meant ended my career path. I've got a prosthetic now, and there's all kind of incredible things that you can do now. We can come back to that in a minute about prosthetics. But at that point in time, it pretty much ended my lifelong dream of becoming a pilot, and I really had no idea what was going to happen next. But I just knew that God was in control, and I was going to trust Him through this process.
So what was that like, going into surgery, like your full body there, and then waking up and something was missing? And then for our visually impaired audience, like how much of your hand did they have to take?
Sure. Even when you trust the Lord that He's going to bring you through something, it's a little scary when you go into major surgery and they tell you you're going to come out of this different.
Yeah.
And so, the morning that you get up to go into the hospital, I remember just, getting in the shower and getting cleaned up and looking at both of my hands and thinking, I'm going to come home without one of these. And so it's a little overwhelming in that moment to think through that. And like, what's this going to be like? How am I going to tie my shoes? Is this going to really hurt really, really bad? Will I ever find somebody that will love me? All these things that young guys or anybody would think through about, because I'm going to be different now.
Yeah.
You go in the hospital, but I can remember one thing that gave me great encouragement. Literally the hallway of the hospital, as they rolled me from the waiting room kind of to the surgical room, was lined with people from our church that were there just to, and this is like 6 o'clock in the morning. And I would say there's probably 50 people there that were just there to, give me a high five, encourage me. Matter of fact, my college pastor, who had really been pouring into my life, he is still the team chaplain for the Florida State Seminoles and knows Deion Sanders and knows all these famous people. But he came down and slept on the floor at my house along with 3 of my college roommates. And that meant the world to me that these guys would just care enough about me to come be there as I go through this surgery. And you go through it, you have surgery, and you wake up, in the post-op room, and you look down and you realize my hand's not there. And you go through that process of then, dealing with that. But I just kind of still had this sense of peace that God was going to use this, had no idea what was next. Still had to do chemotherapy, had to do 6 rounds of chemotherapy. So I would go for like a week at a time, and they would hook me up, and it's basically like having liquid Drano poured into your system. It kills everything in there.
Oh my goodness.
If they spill it on you, it burns your skin. And so you can't do anything because you have no white blood cell count. You can't fight off anything. So I literally had to drop out of school for 6 months and go through that. All my hair fell out. I bloated up like a big dead fish and really thought there's no woman that is ever going to love me because I look hideous. And this year, Amanda and I, my wife, will celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary.
That's so great.
God is good. God is faithful. She is beautiful. And we have a phenomenal marriage. And so, those fears that you have when you go through things like this are just fears, they're not reality. God is good, and God brought me through all that. And so it was an interesting process. Matter of fact, one thing, and learning how to tie my shoes or stuff like that, I had some good friends that, your parents are always helping you out. But I had a friend one day that says, I'm not going to tie your shoes. You got to figure this out.
Oh, wow.
And so literally for like 15 minutes, I had to figure out how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I can now tie my shoes in about 15, 20 seconds like anybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
And
just in time for the fashion to switch to like laceless shoes.
Exactly. So you figure it out. You find ways to adapt. I have a prosthetic that's got like a metal claw hand to it, so I can work out with weights and do yard work, and it looks a little bit like the Terminators sometimes, but it doesn't slow me down. So
why don't you explain? I don't know anything about prosthetics, so why don't you explain like how this works,
sure.
Especially for our visually impaired people who are watching that can't really see exactly the prosthetic you have.
Yeah. So they basically amputated just past my wrist in order to kind of make sure that the cancer cells didn't spread. And so I still have an elbow, which is helpful when it comes to prosthetics because there's more for the prosthetic to kind of grab onto, if you will. And so I just have, the hand I have on now is what they call a static hand. The fingers don't move or anything like that. I can wear my watch. I can wear my wedding ring. It basically is close to the color of my natural skin. But I have this big brace, and it kind of wraps. It's called a figure 9, and it wraps all the way around and hangs on through my other arm, kind of like a belt, if you will, that kind of wraps around me.
Yeah.
For the ladies, and I guess it's kind of like having a bra on, a little bit,
I never would have thought of it that way if you hadn't said that.
But it kind of holds it on so it doesn't just fall off. But I've gone through now 30 plus years of, so 1991, August 20th, 1991 is when I had my amputation. And so I've had prosthetics really from about 4 or 5 months after that. And so it's come a long way since then. And so I actually have a myoelectric hand now where the fingers move, the hand rotates. It's got 17 different positions where you can pick things up. So you can do like credit card swipe. It's touch sensitive, so you can actually tap a phone.
Oh, wow.
All
That's
kind of
awesome.
ways to hold different things, cut a steak. Matter of fact, a couple of years ago, 2016, one of the guys I played soccer with growing up, his dad owned the prosthetics place, and he runs the prosthetics place. And so a couple of years ago, when some of the myoelectrics were coming out, he invited me to go up with him to Ohio State University, and with people from Chicago and Germany all came, and it was really a research and development time to develop new prosthetics where they could sense heat, where they had hair follicles basically in them, and where they employed Hollywood artists to come in and paint them to where if you just laid the arm on the table, you literally thought somebody had chopped an arm off. It looked that real.
That is crazy.
Even for me, it was kind of freaky to look at them because they felt almost real.
I mean, I lost my vision almost 10 years ago now, so I've never seen a prosthetic that cool before. That sounds really fascinating how they can make it that realistic and just that helpful in the first place.
Yes. Unfortunately, they tend to break down. So mine currently is being worked on. One of the fingers broke, and so it's in the shop, if you will. I call it the parts place. But so you got to take it in, and they work on it and fine tune it. And but it's when I first had my amputation, not a lot of people had amputations. I remember as a kid, I'd see somebody, as a little kid, you kind of tend to stare. And so I said, once I became an amputee, I'm going to take the initiative with kids. I'm going to, approach them and allow them to realize this isn't something scary. So I will kneel down. I'll ask them to touch it, tell them, hey, it feels like your shoe. And really, I wanted to be a goodwill ambassador for kids, especially to realize this isn't something to be scared of. This is normal and natural. Well, then unfortunately, as our country has gone through different wars and things like that, a lot of military guys have come back as amputees. And so it's become more prominent now for people to have prosthetics of all kinds. And really, it's kind of funny because people have really embraced it. So people that are lower extremities with leg amputees and stuff like that, they don't even want the natural look. Now they'll paint them up where they got, like Buccaneer fans. It'll look like a pirate ship and all kind of stuff. I mean, they really become very artistic with it as opposed to the natural look.
Yeah, I remember when me and my husband were at the University of Arkansas, one of our cheerleaders was a leg amputee. And I just remember just seeing pictures of her on like the school website or stuff. I was like, that is so cool. That is so amazing that someone could help her still get to do things that like 100 years ago would not be possible.
Yeah.
So
it is, it's exciting. I've worked with the VA. One year I was actually a part of a military testing program because a lady at our church who was a nurse out at the VA in Tampa, and she asked me to come out, and it was like this $100 million project for them to develop prosthetics for guys coming back from combat. And so, because you're talking about guys like our Navy SEALs or these high macho kind of guys, and it just kind of wrecks their world when they lose part of their body. And so I was able to go in and work with them to help them understand that your life's not over. God can still work in your life, or you can get past this. And so that was a neat time to be able to work with. Having always wanted to be in the military, it was my way to actually serve the country by being able to invest in people that were struggling to kind of get past their life change. And but they had this $100,000 arm, and they would bring it in like this suitcase kind of a thing, and they'd open it up and ask me to put it on and wear it to show these guys how to utilize it. And I'm like, I don't want to drop this. I can't afford $100,000
That is a lot of pressure.
Arm. And but that was a neat experience to be able to work with the military like that.
Mm-hmm.
But.
So would you say that, like, obviously this is like a big, devastating, shocking thing when you're only 19, being told, like, not only do you have cancer, we're gonna have to take your hand, we're gonna have to completely change your life. Would you say that you've still been able to, like, go on with your life and feel like things have been normal? Like, you did find your wife, Amanda, and have things been really normal for you guys?
So life's probably never normal for anybody, but I would not trade what I've gone through for anything in the world. If the Lord gave me the opportunity to go back and be a military pilot versus having an amputation, I wouldn't change it. Because by going through cancer, it definitely got my attention on the Lord. I'd grown up going to church, and I was there all the time because your parents take you to church. You got to go. But when this happened, my faith had become real to me, and I really began to, study my Bible and pay attention in church. And God just began to reveal to me, how real He is, and that He does have a plan for my life. And so, because I've gone through this, there's usually not a week that goes by that I don't get to share my story. And my prayer is that because I lost a hand, I'm able to talk to people about who God is, so that ultimately one day they'll make it to heaven. Because this life is temporary. We know what eternal is. And so I know one day I'll have two hands again, because the Bible says that, we get to heaven, we have brand new bodies. And so I know one day I'll have a brand new body, but I don't want to go to heaven just so I get two hands. I want to go to heaven because that's where Jesus is.
Right.
And so, I'm very thankful because it's a good witnessing tool, because people ask me what happened, and I get to talk about, bad things happen in life, but God is good. And so in Amanda and I's life, so at 19, I didn't know if I was ever going to get married. Didn't know if I was going to have kids. One of the things that they ask you, it's kind of awkward when they ask you this, because before you do chemotherapy, they're like, this will sterilize you. And and there's things that you can do to not be sterile. And I'm like, I don't know that I want to do that. I'm just going to trust the Lord. And so that's what I did. And so that led to an exciting part of my life, Amanda and I's life as well, because as we got married, I thought, well, maybe the Lord will allow us to have children. I don't know. I mean,
because it's not like a 100% guarantee either way, is it? Like sure. Doctors can't know 100% if you really won't be able to have kids or not, right?
Exactly. And so, for about 6 years, we tried to have kids and it just didn't work out. And so one day I was reading an article about the 700,000 orphans in Russia. And God just kind of convicted my heart that that's what we need to do. We need to adopt. And then I looked at how much that cost. And I thought, well, I was pastoring a little small country church at that time with about 100 people. And I thought, well, I don't know how we're going to do this. But we had a guy in our church who was actually our finance chairman guy. And his wife was out of town one week visiting family. We had him over for dinner. And he's like, well, Pastor, how much does a deposit cost to do this adoption? And I'm like, $200. He's got, do you have $200? I'm like, yeah, we got $200. Because the things that you'd read, it's going to be $25,000 to $30,000 to adopt, especially internationally. And so we just said, all right, we're going to trust the Lord. And it was amazing because at the same time we're trying to go through the adoption, this whole country church, we needed to build a new building. And so I got Amanda in front of the church and I said, any monies we would give to the adoption, we're going to give to the building campaign, thinking I was being this great young pastor to do all this stuff. And, Amanda fortunately went along with me, and that's literally what we did. But God just showed up in some amazing ways. It really was a good faith journey for me to know that God is good and God's in control, and ultimately provided all of the funds necessary for us to go over there and adopt our daughter. And so her name is Reagan, and we brought her home when she was about 2 years old. She's now 18. She's a high school senior, and time literally has flown by. But in that process, she's been able to make her own profession of faith. And when you read about these orphans in Russia, at the time, most of them, when they turn 15, they basically are kicked out of the orphanage, and they get like the equivalent of $500 to their name, but they've got this black stamp in their passport that basically says they're uneducated.
Oh wow.
They can't really do anything. And so most of them end up in drugs and alcohol. They end up in jail, prostitution, or dead. And
That's horrifying.
So the year that we adopted Reagan, or really we've even looked at statistics, is probably only about 5,000 kids out of 700,000 got adopted. Because Russia had opened and now is closed really right after Reagan came home, their adoption. And so to think about her life and the change that's happened in her life, it happened because I had cancer and lost my hand. We never would have explored adoption had that not happened. And so, the irony is, if you look at kind of infant pictures of my wife and Reagan, they look almost identical.
Are you serious?
And but when you go to adopt, you go what they call blind. You
Yeah.
don't know who you're going to adopt. You literally get there and they have a stack of probably, it's like 300 pages of, single sheets of different children. And they're like, do you want to adopt this child? And you're kind of like, well, we flew all over the way, all the way over here to Russia. So I guess so,
We're taking home somebody.
Yeah. So it's quite an experience. There's a whole lot I could talk about even with adoption, but that's part of the story. And so it's been neat to kind of see how God has worked in Reagan's life and what God will do with her in her own faith journey. But that's part of the story.
So what would you say to another 19-year-old guy who finds out that he has cancer, or maybe a mom who found out that her baby that she's pregnant with might be missing a hand, or someone who is in a similar situation to yours? How can you use your story to kind of encourage and inspire them?
Sure. I think, life has challenges, whether it's an illness, a financial situation, a disability, a marriage issue. There's all kind of things that people struggle with in life. It's knowing that God is good, that God loves us, that God has a plan for us. And if we will trust him, he will take care of us. He will provide for us. Life may not go the way we think. Life definitely has not gone the way that I thought it would, but I wouldn't change it. And I think when people see life from an eternal perspective, it changes everything. We live in this world where it's very consumer driven. We look around us at things that other people have and think, well, if I have that, that will make me happy or make my life meaningful. But those things don't bring meaning or happiness. True fulfillment comes in a relationship with Jesus Christ, and true purpose for your life comes in having a relationship with Jesus Christ. So no matter what you face, whether it's a medical situation, a financial situation, or whatever it might be, it's trusting the Lord that he's in control and that he will work in and through that to use you for his honor and glory. And so, yeah, I'm thankful for what God has done in my life, and I consider it a blessing.
Sometimes the greatest gifts we're ever given come laced through pain. God puts us through the fire so we can overcome with him and see the hope on the other side. I am just so in awe of what God has done in Marc's life and the beauty that has been created in his family because of the tragedy of cancer. And it is just a so encouraging thing to know that even in the depths of our despair, even in those moments when we turn to God and say, why would you do this to me? He has a plan. We just have to hang in long enough to see it. Time for Ask Me Anything. So the first question I have for you today is, how do you watch movies if you're blind? All right, so I do still watch movies, even though I've lost my vision. I love them so much. It's my favorite relaxing thing to do. I love spending quality time with my husband, watching a film together, spending time watching movies with my kids. It's really enjoyable to me. I love storytelling, and film is one of my favorite mediums for it. But you're right, it can be really difficult for me to keep up with a story, especially when there is a lot of physicality or setting involved in the plot that is not necessarily described through the dialogue. This can be really hard in action films, fantasy films, silent films. It is incredibly difficult for me to keep up with. But luckily, there is this tool for visually impaired people called descriptive audio or audio description. And what it is a pre-recorded narrator will voice over on top of the film while it is playing and keep you updated with all of the descriptions that you're missing. So, for example, if the dialogue opens and kids are at school, you don't really know that from them saying like, hey, how are you? What did you get for lunch? You have no idea that they're at school. They could be at the park for all you know. But the descriptive audio will come in and say, at a school, kids wander through a lunch line. And then you're like, oh, okay, I totally get it. And maybe you would have got it by yourself just by the sounds in the background of like chairs scraping against the floor, forks hitting plates, chewing. Maybe you would have figured that out. But maybe you wouldn't have. And then as a blind person, you miss a lot in the film when you don't fully understand the context of the dialogue. So I love descriptive audio. It is amazing when a film comes with it. Most of the time they do now. Accessibility has really increased for visually impaired people, and it's been so nice and so enjoyable for me. But my favorite, like, funniest little thing about descriptive audio is sometimes the narrators get a little too into the movie. And I've noticed of late, they've started to do a trend where the narrator is very monotone and very short and to the point with the description. And I think what they're trying to accomplish in this is for me to kind of tune it out a little bit, zone into the movie to the point where I'm not really noticing the narrator very much anymore. And that's fine. That's right. It does make it less distracting for the film, and I can really dial into the plot and the characters and not be distracted by the personality of the narrator. But it's really fun when they don't do that. And my favorite example of this is Pirates of the Caribbean 4 on Stranger Tides. The guy who narrates that film loves him some Johnny Depp. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's in the beginning of the movie, so I'm going to do it anyway. In the beginning of Pirates of the Caribbean 4 on Stranger Tides, Jack is pretending to be a judge. So the narrator has to tell you that the judge before you is actually Johnny Depp. It's not a judge. And that's something that you might not have realized as a blind person when you heard Johnny Depp's voice, but you don't understand that he's wearing a wig pretending to be a judge. It's quite confusing when you can't see that. So, because he is so excited at the fact that he has discovered that the judge is secretly Captain Jack Sparrow, the narrator feels the need to announce with great enthusiasm, a judge enters the room. It's Captain Jack Sparrow! It's so fun. It is so entertaining. And I'm kind of sad that they're stopping doing away with this style of production for descriptive audio because it makes my soul so happy. But either way, most films have this now. It's a really great feature that helps me watch movies. But sometimes in action films particularly, it can be not quite enough for me to follow everything going on because there's only so much the narrator can describe when speaking in between the dialogue. They try to never speak over the characters actually talking so they don't detract from the actual film and script. And sometimes it's just not enough. Like, for example, in Star Wars: A Force Awakens, I couldn't keep up. I really had trouble even with the descriptive audio. And in those moments, I turn to a loved one, typically my husband, and say, I don't know what's going on in this film. I need you to pause it. And he very sweetly and very kindly will pause the film and say, okay, what do you not understand? I'm like, the pew, pew, pew. Don't understand who they're shooting or why. I need help. And so it's really great of him to just keep me updated, let me know what's going on. And that is how I watch movies. Okay, so the next question I have for you today is, how do you do your makeup if you're blind? The answer to that is not very well, to be honest. I've had enough practice that I'm really good at just slapping it on there. I know how to throw foundation on my face. I know that blush goes on my cheekbones. But you're right, I'm not very good at the fine-tuning of the makeup. So I will get all of my stuff out. I'll lay it on the table. I know what everything is because usually it's all in different shaped bottles, or I will put the brown eyeshadow in a certain pocket of my makeup bag and keep the purple in a separate one so I know which one I'm dealing with at all times. And that is really helpful for keeping track of the makeup. But as far as that fine-tuning detail, especially on the eye makeup, I have to turn to a sighted person for help. And I just say, hey, when I was applying my mascara, I felt myself smudge it quite a bit. Here's a wipey. Can you just touch it up for me? And that's kind of embarrassing. I wish I could just do it by myself. I wish I was that skilled, but I'm just not right now. Maybe one day I will be that skilled, but who knows? It's not that big of a deal to ask for help. So I just do. And honestly, if I'm not like doing a public speaking event and I'm not filming for this podcast, I don't wear makeup anyway. So it's not really that big of a problem. If you want to see more content from me, you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, or you can check out my website, chelseapainterdavis.com. That is a great place to sign up for my newsletter or to check on my upcoming events. Do you want to see me in person? The next place I will be sharing my testimony is All Things New, a fundraiser for the Life Choice Pregnancy Center in Winter Haven on Friday, April 12th. I would love to see you there. Thank you so much for hanging around through the end of the episode. I hope today that we have shown you that all life is worth living. Just like in the book of Esther, where God paints a beautiful portrait from the background, God is painting a beautiful portrait with your life, and we can learn so much from each other if we only share our stories. Whenever it feels like the darkness is pressing in, just remember the words of Jesus Christ in John chapter 9. As long as I am in the world, I am the light. Love you, bye. Bring me back chicken.